of Hormuz looks less like a battlefield than a wound held open by sunlight. The water is silver. The tankers sit heavy and still, like dark buildings floating on a nervous sea. Men on deck scan the horizon, not for beauty but for permission. Permission to move, permission to live. Permission to pass through a narrow strip of water that has suddenly become wider than diplomacy and more dangerous than any speech delivered from behind a presidential seal. Somewhere aboard those stranded ships, crews are counting what remains. Food, water, fuel, medicine, patience. The ordinary arithmetic of survival. Somewhere in Tehran, military commanders are drawing their own line across the same water, warning that any foreign armed force entering the strait will be treated as a threat. Somewhere in Washington, President Trump gives the operation a name polished enough for television: Project Freedom. And just like that, the world is asked to believe that a mission backed by 15,000 military personnel, more than 100 aircraft, warships and drones is simply there to guide ships home. And before we go deeper into the machinery behind that word freedom, pause for 1 second. If you believe powerful governments should be questioned before they drag ordinary people toward war like this video. And please subscribe if you have not done so, because this channel is built for people who refuse to be hypnotized by official language when human lives are on the line. But the sea has heard this language before. Rescue, security, freedom, stability. Words that arrive clean and leave covered in ash. The Strait of Hormuz is not just water. It is a throat, a hinge, a nerve in the body of the global economy. Through it moves oil, money, pressure, dependency, and the old imperial fantasy that the world's most powerful states can manage other people's regions as if they were corridors in their own house. For Iran, this is not merely a shipping dispute. It is sovereignty under pressure. It is a warning shaped by decades of sanctions, threats, interventions, and military encirclement. It is the refusal to let America decide, again, what counts as order in a region America does not own. For Washington, the story is being framed differently. Ships are trapped, crews are desperate, commerce is frozen, the world economy is hurting. America must act. America must guide. America must restore movement. That is the oldest trick in the Imperial Handbook. Describe power as service. Describe escalation as responsibility. Describe entry into another region's red line as the burden of leadership. The danger now is not only that two military powers may collide. The deeper danger is that each side is speaking from a reality the other refuses to recognize. America says it is protecting innocent vessels. Iran says America is violating the ceasefire that began on April 7th. America says the mission is defensive. Iran sees foreign armed force approaching a strategic waterway it now claims to control. America speaks the language of maritime security. Iran hears the language of war. And between those two interpretations, the ships sit trapped like steel prayers. A ceasefire is not peace. It is a held breath. It is a candle carried through a room full of gasoline. It depends on restraint, discipline, and the terrifying humility of leaders who understand that not every provocation must become a performance. But humility is rare in the theater of power. Pride is common. Spectacle is common. The need to appear strong can become more dangerous than weakness itself. One wrong move could tear the pause apart. A drone misread, a small boat moving too quickly, a radio warning ignored, a nervous commander, a president needing to look decisive, a warship struck, a retaliation ordered. Then come the emergency broadcasts, the maps, the arrows, the retired generals, the grave voices explaining why nothing else could have been done. But there is always something else before the first shot. There is always a road not taken before the road disappears. What makes this moment so combustible is the mismatch between the language and the machinery. The language says guidance, the machinery says confrontation. 15,000 military personnel do not arrive as a gesture. More than 100 aircraft do not hover as reassurance. Warships and drones do not carry the emotional texture of a helping hand. They carry the threat of consequence. They make every movement heavier. They turn a rescue mission into a test of power. And power, once staged, often demands an audience. The public, the viewers, the people asked to accept the framing before the facts have settled. We are told to imagine trapped ships, hungry crews, innocent commerce. And yes, those human stakes are real. The sailors are real. Their fear is real. Their exhaustion is real. The problem is not caring about them. The problem is using their suffering as a doorway for escalation, while pretending the doorway is a moral necessity. So do not let this pass through your mind like just another headline. Stay with the human beings inside the story. Comment below with one word if you see the pattern: propaganda. Because naming the pattern is how we begin to break its spell. Because those crews are not symbols, they are people. Somewhere there is a captain trying to keep his voice steady. Somewhere there is an engineer listening to the hum of a ship that cannot move. Somewhere there is a cook stretching food across too many days. Somewhere there is a young sailor who thought the sea would mean labor, loneliness, and maybe danger from storms, but not becoming human cargo inside a geopolitical standoff. This is what great power conflict does. It turns working people into scenery. It turns hunger into justification. It turns fear into strategy. It turns bodies into evidence for whatever the powerful already wanted to do. And then the market enters, cold and bloodless, speaking in its own sacred language. Oil prices, petrol prices, inflation, supply chains, regional security, global stability. These phrases are not meaningless, but they are incomplete. They describe the anxiety of economies without describing the violence required to keep those economies comfortable. The world wants the oil to move. It wants prices controlled. It wants ships to pass. It wants the illusion of normal life restored. But normal life in this system has always rested on militarized routes, coerced regions, and the assumption that America has the right to appear wherever its interests feel threatened. That assumption is rarely named because it is treated as weather, natural, expected, beyond debate. But it is not natural. It is political. It is historical. It is enforced. The Strait of Hormuz is narrow, but the history pressing into it is vast. Western power has spent generations treating the Middle East as a chessboard, a fuel depot, a battlefield, a laboratory for coercion, a place where sovereignty becomes negotiable the moment it interferes with extraction. Governments rise and fall, sanctions tighten, bases expand, fleets patrol. Leaders speak of freedom while protecting the architecture of domination. And when resistance appears, it is stripped of history and presented as sudden, irrational aggression. That is why the beginning of the story matters. If the story begins with Iran's warning, Iran looks like the source of danger. If the story begins with decades of pressure, encirclement, intervention, and economic warfare, the picture changes. Not because Iran becomes innocent. No state is innocent. But because power becomes visible. The frame widens, the convenient morality collapses. The West is very good at narrowing the frame. It starts the clock when the other side reacts. It starts the map where its own interests begin. It starts the moral argument at the moment resistance becomes inconvenient. Everything before that becomes background noise. Everything after that becomes security. Masterpiece of naming. It does what political language is designed to do. It preloads the feeling before the event. Who could oppose freedom? Who could oppose guiding stranded ships? Who could oppose saving hungry crews? The name softens the steel. It turns military movement into humanitarian choreography. It makes escalation sound like duty. But freedom backed by warships is never a neutral word. It asks to be interrogated. Freedom for whom? Freedom to move ships? Freedom to project force? Freedom to challenge Iran's control of the strait? Freedom to preserve an economic order built on permanent inequality and selective sovereignty? There is no innocence in branding. Names are weapons too. And if this analysis is giving language to something you already felt but could not quite name, share this video. Not because algorithms are sacred little goblins that must be fed, though apparently they are, but because the more people learn to read power carefully, the harder it becomes to sell war as mercy. Meanwhile, diplomacy flickers in the background like a match cupped against wind. Iran has put forward a 14-point proposal to end the war. A counter-proposal has come through Pakistan. Officials are reviewing language while military assets move across the region. This is the strange double life of modern conflict. Paper in one hand, steel in the other. Negotiators search for a sentence that might save lives, while commanders prepare for the sentence that ends them. There is still a door, but the engines are already running, and escalation has gravity. Once forces are placed in motion, they create their own logic. No leader wants to blink, no military wants to appear vulnerable, no empire wants to be warned away. The entire structure begins to lean toward collision, and every actor insists the other side is doing the leaning. This is how wars become inevitable, only after humans make enough decisions to pretend they were not decisions. The most dangerous phrase in politics may be, "we had no choice." It usually appears after choice has been murdered. A tanker near Fujairah has already been hit by unknown projectiles, with the crew reported safe and no environmental damage reported. That sentence is both relief and warning. Safe for now, no environmental impact for now, unknown projectiles for now. The word unknown sits there like a fuse. In a tense region, ambiguity is not empty, it is explosive. People rush to assign blame, governments rush to protect narratives. The fog of war does not wait for war to officially begin. It arrives early, contaminating perception before the first definitive answer can stand upright. This is the hour when propaganda becomes most seductive. Not the crude kind. Not the cartoon villain kind. The elegant kind. The kind that speaks in polished moral binaries. One side protects, the other threatens. One side stabilizes, the other disrupts. One side acts reluctantly, the other provokes. It is a story built for quick consumption, designed to travel faster than doubt. RY, not cynicism, not indifference. Doubt as moral hygiene. Doubt as a defense against being recruited into someone else's war fever. We should doubt every empire that claims to be rescuing people while sending fleets. We should doubt every leader who discovers humanitarian concern at the exact point where strategic interests are threatened. We should doubt every operation whose name sounds like a movie trailer. We should doubt every attempt to turn a narrow waterway into a stage for masculine performance dressed as global responsibility. The human heart of this crisis is not in the speeches. It is on the ships. It is with the crews waiting in heat and uncertainty. It is also with ordinary people across the region who know that when war expands, it does not remain neatly at sea. It enters homes through prices, shortages, grief, funerals, conscription, displacement, and fear. It enters the nervous system. It enters the kitchen table. It enters the future. War is never only where the missiles land. War spreads through everything. And the terrible irony is that everyone claims to be preventing it. America claims force will prevent greater chaos. Iran claims its warning will prevent foreign intrusion. Maritime agencies warn of critical threats to prevent disaster. Diplomats negotiate to prevent collapse. Analysts speak of deterrence, balance, leverage, credibility. The vocabulary is full of prevention, yet the machinery keeps moving toward the very thing everyone says they want to avoid. This is how the world sleepwalks into catastrophe, wide awake, fully briefed and armed with excellent vocabulary. The Strait of Hormuz now holds a question larger than itself. Can powerful states restrain themselves when restraint looks like losing face? Can diplomacy survive the theater of military readiness? Can the world defend trapped civilians without turning them into props? Can we separate genuine humanitarian concern from the imperial habit of arriving with guns and calling it order? The answer is not hidden in the sea. It is hidden in political will. In whether leaders choose de-escalation before pride hardens. In whether publics refuse to be hypnotized by the language of rescue when rescue begins to sound like war. In whether we remember that the people most likely to suffer are rarely the people who named the operation. The sea remains silver. The ships remain waiting. The crews remain human. Iran has drawn its line. America has announced its mission. Diplomacy still breathes, but shallowly. The world watches, pretending to be a spectator, though every economy, every government, every citizen fed on official narratives is already inside the story. There are moments when history narrows into a single passage, a bridge, a border, a checkpoint, a strait, a place where all the arrogance of power must squeeze through a small opening and suddenly everyone can hear the walls closing in. Hormuz is that place now. It is not only a waterway, it is a warning. If the world exhales into war, leaders will tell us it could not be avoided. Do not believe them too quickly. The fire always has a genealogy. The explosion always has parents. The catastrophe always has a paper trail. No empire should be trusted when it calls escalation a rescue. No government should be allowed to turn trapped workers into scenery for military theater. No waterway should become an altar where ordinary people are sacrificed to the vanity of power. If there is still a way out, it will not come from the roar of aircraft or the shadow of warships. It will come from restraint, from negotiation, from refusing to let pride wear the mask of principle. And if the Strait of Hormuz is a throat, then the world is holding its breath. The question is whether we use that breath to speak against war before the fire speaks for us. Subscribe to the Progressive Wave and step into a current that refuses to be dragged by propaganda.